Everyone, welcome to the How to Not Pass Your Inspection session hosted by Mr. Jeff Reeves. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A and we will respond to them as fast as they come in. It's all you, Jeff.
Okay, good afternoon. This Infinite Recharge Reloaded slide up here is just me. FRC has not shared anything as to what they're going to do about it. I just felt we had to have some recognition of the fact that this is not last year's Infinite Recharge. There's nothing other than just my sense of humor, for lack of better terms, in there. Did you give me the ball, Allison?
Yes, you still have the ball.
Okay, why can't I advance a slide? There we go. Typically, I like to have interaction with the audience. One thing I've learned about doing this stuff virtually is I'm talking to a screen. I can't see you guys. I have no idea if you've got puzzled looks in your face, if you're asleep, if you've gotten up and walked out. And as Allison said, we've got the Q&A open. I like questions. It both tells me, A, I'm not getting my point across, or B, I didn't do a good job of explaining what I'm trying to explain. So if you have any questions at all, pop them in the Q&A. I can see it. Allison's monitoring it, and we'll try to answer them as quickly as we can, even if it means interrupting what I'm trying to say. I don't have a problem with that, so feel free to ask questions. All right, inspection. We all know that FRC requires your robot to be inspected before you put it on the playing field. And FRC is pretty good about giving you information on what's required to get a robot past inspection. Well, one of the things that I find, not frustrating, but very commonly as a problem, is that people make the same mistakes over and over again, and it means that they don't get to pass inspection. Now, that means that the robot inspector has an issue. I'm the chief robot inspector. I get an issue. But more importantly, the team is now upset and disturbed because they didn't get past inspection. Now, what are we going to do? So let's talk about some things that will get you to not pass your robot inspection. Robot inspections are required. Nobody's seen the 2021 rules. I cannot believe they'll be much different from the past rules. But to play this game, your robot must go through an inspection. And basically, that inspection is to ensure compliance with the robot construction and the things that are required by the eligibility and inspection rules. We're also looking a lot for safety. These machines are big, they're powerful, they're running relatively quickly, they can do some damage. So your inspector is going to be looking for not just the simply enumerated items, but general safety aspects of it. And also, almost all these inspectors are coming from teams and past experience. They're also looking for things that you might have done that may cause you a problem, and we will try to prevent you from having that problem. So the inspection is not only the bare minimum required by the rules, it's also an effort to make sure you're safe and to help you prevent, for lack of better terms, stupidity with your robot. You can't read the flow chart, I know that. It's up there just to demonstrate that there actually is a formal process for the inspection. And this is what the inspection team is following. It's not very elaborate. It basically means you bring your robot to the inspection process. We follow it through a defined series of steps, and hopefully we accomplish the inspection and put you on the playing field. You can find this on the FRC website, but it's not something that really pertains to you. I've got it here because sometimes, especially less experienced teams, seem to view this as some arcane, mythical process. Well, there's a method to the madness. Okay, so let's think about how do I not pass the inspection? Absolutely, positively, the easiest way, the thing that requires the least effort on your part, simply don't read the rules. Now, this year being a reboot of last year, there's going to be a tendency not to read the rules. I read them last year. We were okay last year. Do I need to read the rules again? FRC hasn't told us anything other than that last year's robots will be reusable and should be able to either be or be made competitive. What that means, I don't know. I would expect there will be some tweaking of the rules, probably mostly on the gameplay side than on the robot side. But gameplay does influence how you build your rules, how you build your robot. So, yeah, let's not bother to read the rules. We've done it before. We've been in this game for 10 years. We know what we're doing. This year in particular, it'll be the same as last year. Yeah, sure. No need to look at those rules in any shape, fashion, or form. And then the one I get a lot. Some team has done something, or the discussion on Chief Delphi, or you see something on Robot 3 days, and they all say, let's do it this way. Something to keep in mind. Robot in 3 days, Chief Delphi, and what another team tells you has no bearing whatsoever, no validity, no authority. I don't care if Dean Kamen posts on Chief Delphi and says you can do something, or if Al Skirkowitz says you can do something on Chief Delphi, it doesn't count. What counts is the rule book, the Q&A, and any team updates. So I don't care how many people have said you can do X, how many teams are doing X. If it's not in the rules, you can't do it, and you won't pass the inspection. Second most common thing, people don't worry about size or weight. They are the two hard limits for your robot. You cannot exceed the maximum size, not by so much as a bolt head. You cannot exceed the maximum weight. The scales are good to 1/10 of a pound. You might get away with 125.003 or 0.04, depends on where it rounds. But basically, if it says 120.1, you aren't going to get to play. Close enough doesn't count. It's non-negotiable. There's nothing I can do for you until you get into those limits. Now, every team I've worked with and many of the teams I've inspected go push that design right up to those limits. You want that extra half inch of space. You want that last half a pound. You want every last possible bit of robot that you can get onto the field. Well, there's something called tolerance. And in the real world, tolerances stack. Everything's off a little bit from what you planned on. It's a little bit over, the next part's a little bit over, the next part's a little bit over, and you bolt them all together. All those little bit overs add up, and suddenly you're too big or you're too heavy. I've had several times where I've measured a robot, it's been outside the size limit, and the design team will pull up their drawings and show me the CAD drawings, and the dimension of the CAD drawings are within limits. We're not inspecting the CAD drawing, we're inspecting that robot. And if you don't build to within the limits, you do not have a legal robot. Legal robots don't play our game. Frame perimeter. I don't remember exactly when we changed. There used to be a defined size to the robot. As long as you're inside of a box, you're okay. We have since changed to a frame perimeter. And it varies from game to game, but it's literally a measurement of the outside perimeter of your robot as defined by being the structure within the bumper zone. And it is a hard limit. You can picture that frame perimeter being extended vertically up and down to the floor and to infinity. If you're above that frame perimeter and stick out, it counts. The inspector let it go. It's only a minor protrusion. I have had robots rejected for a bolt head. And I'm not talking about a half-inch bolt head. I'm talking about a 632 bolt head. It must fit within the frame perimeter. Sometimes the rules will allow you for alternative configurations, but generally they are one or the other. I had a machine show up from a foreign team at championship one year in my division, and they had taken the maximum of all the alternative configurations and built the robot to fit the maximum of all of them. I'm not quite sure how they got to championship with a robot in that configuration, but we spent most of the day reconfiguring a robot to get them into legal sizes so they could go play. When you're building your robot, keep an eye on that frame perimeter. It tends to grow. If your robot's a little out of square and you're not a perfect square, the diagonals start adding up, it can cause you some real issues. And again, this is not a negotiable item. Pay no attention to the weight. This year it was 125 pounds. It's been 120 pounds for years. I didn't catch that this long. I will fix that. It is a generous allowance. It's a lot of things go into a robot, though. And if you don't keep track of what you're putting into it, you can easily find yourself getting too heavy. Don't know if you've heard it or not, but FRC has decided this year there will be no bill of materials. I'm not personally happy about that, but one thing I've always done with my teams is we keep a pretty good bill of materials, and I add one column to the right of it, and I put weights on that bill of materials so I can keep a running total I think that robot should weigh. And I weigh sub-assembly to keep a running total. Many years back, it's a bit of an involved story, but we went to a scrimmage back when we were regional, and our shooter mechanism wasn't ready. So it was left back in the shop. We just take the drivetrain down, and we'd see how it worked out and so on and so forth. We knew we were going to be heavy. I put just the drivetrain on the scales. We were over 130 pounds, and I got 15 or 20 pounds of machinery back in the shop. And so I had 3 days to take about 15 pounds out of a robot to get it legal. You don't want to do that. So keep an eye on that weight.
We had a question asking to confirm if 125 pounds is the maximum weight.
It was last year. I am assuming it will be again this year. I do not expect them to change that. I didn't catch that in my slides. When I stole some of these slides, it was 120 pounds. But yes, to the best of my knowledge, 125 pounds is legal. Okay. Another step on how not to pass this inspection. Well, we didn't need to read the rules. It's the same as last year. We know what we're doing. So why should we pay any attention to the updates? Well, updates change the rules. Particularly week 0, week 1, we find that things that the game design committee and everybody involved thought were going to work don't, and they will make some sort of a change. And that change becomes just as binding as the initial set of rules. Somebody needs to pay attention to those things. Somebody needs to keep track of them, how they affect both the rules in general, the game rules and the robot rules, and how it affects your design. Personal opinion, every team, I think, should have somebody appointed to be a rules czar. It's a term I use, but you can call them anything you want. Some student who basically knows the rules cold, and you can ask, if we want to do X, will that be acceptable? And they know the rules. They say, yes, you can do that. Oh, no, you can't. They're the people to keep track of the rules changes, the updates, and the various other things that may or may not affect your robot design. I've had teams, unfortunately, figure that they don't need to worry about that because if it's all important, the discussion on Chief Delphi will bring it up. And by reading Chief Delphi, we'll know what has changed and what we need to do about it. What did I say earlier? Chief Delphi isn't official. It doesn't count for the paper it's printed upon. So you may get good information from Chief Delphi, and I don't suggest that you not read it, but do not rely upon Chief Delphi. It is not official information. That being said, if you are relying upon a team update or a Q&A interpretation, that is official, and it is worth more than the paper it's printed upon. So if you make a decision based upon that, I highly suggest you print that and bring it to your inspection, because your inspector may or may not be as up to date as he needs to be. And to be quite honest, we sometimes forget things. Those of us who have been doing this for a few years sometimes remember last year's rule, and it isn't right for this year. So it helps to have documentation. It helps both you get past. It helps remind us that, oh yeah, it changed for this year. Okay, those are the simple things. Now, let's get a little more creative on how we are going to not pass our inspection. The two easiest ways to get sincere and involved interest of the inspector. bumpers and safety. Bumpers shouldn't be hard. There are pages and pages in the manual on how to build a bumper. The bumper is defined as a required safety element of the robot. First is big on safety. We do not allow an unsafe robot to play. A robot that does not have bumpers is by definition unsafe. If the bumpers do not comply with the requirements, they're not allowed on the robot, therefore they're unsafe. So bumpers become quite important. How do we get in trouble with robots, with bumpers? Well, we pay no attention to the rules. They don't really affect much. They don't affect the robot design. We'll worry about them later. And we'll worry about them later after we get our robot built. That's the important thing. I got to have a machine. We got to get that done. And when we get this all done, we'll just slap bumpers on it in some shape, form, or fashion. Well, there are requirements for the bumpers. They have to fit within certain parameters. And if you don't consider the bumper as part of your basic design process, particularly how you're going to mount them on your robot, it's going to come back to bite you. And when it does, you're going to have bumper problems, and the inspector is going to be looking at the bumpers and quite possibly telling you, nope, they're not legal, not acceptable, you got to remake them. And that is no fun at the day of competition, particularly in the districts where we don't have as much time as we used to have. So bumpers are important. Team numbers have to be on those bumpers. You know, we have to be able to identify the team, both for the judges, for the referees, for the callers, and they have to be shown on all four sides so we can see what's going on. And teams get really creative with how they put numbers on their bumpers. They'll make them in a fancy font in their team colors. Well, if you look at the rules don't allow that. They define the font within some interpretation, some variation allowed, but they also require you to be in specific colors. Basically, you're supposed to be in white. You can be in a different color if you outline it in white, and it has to be clearly distinctive on the bumpers. It can't be in, I have to squint to figure out what it is. So if you have a team color that happens to be red or blue, and you put a red or a blue number on your bumpers and don't have a good distinct white outline, you're going to have word with the inspectors. Just pay some attention to the rules. Let's not do it. This is one that I really wish FRC would change a little bit. I like the fact that teams will sometimes put their school or sponsor logo on their bumpers because you're trying to show off the people who are supporting you. They're trying to give recognition to the guys who are making this possible for you. Unfortunately, FRC says no. You can put a FRC logo on it, and you can put a number on it, and that's about it. You can put logos and sponsor logos and decorations all over your robot elsewhere than the bumpers, but not on the bumpers. The other big issue we run into, as you know, we have to have bumpers that match our alliance. We have a red alliance, we have a blue alliance.
Jeff, we have a question.
Sure.
It says, are cyan bumpers allowed for Blue Alliance matches, or does it have to be the traditional blue?
This is one of those questions that I wish FRC would just take a stand on. The official ruling is, to the reasonably astute observer, it has to be red or blue. Now, the definition of a reasonably astute observer is left entirely to the discretion of the inspection team. Personal opinion. Slightly off of blue, I can live with. Way off of blue, I can't. I've had teams argue that purple, which is basically red and blue at the same time, is legal for both sides. I don't buy that. I would suggest, like we said earlier, don't attract any more attention than you need to. Is there a reason you want to use some weird color? If there is a good, logical, consistent reason, you can make a case to the inspector, and it's not horribly right from a red or a blue, you may get away with it. That's going to be a judgment call. If you want to go down that road, I would highly suggest sending me a picture of what you want to do. Let me look at it. I'll give you a ruling, and if I decide it's acceptable, by definition, I'm the lead robot inspector for Peachtree District. It'll be acceptable, and that is something you can take to an inspector at your event.
As a head referee, I want to also interject just a second and basically say cyan is one of those neon colors that's not fun to look at and very hard to read white text on top of. Please keep in mind that you've got multiple people trying to look at your robot and make decisions very quickly. And if you make it harder to make those decisions quickly, we may not be too happy.
Yeah. What Allison just said, the harder you make it on the game officials, the inspectors, et cetera, the judges, the referees, everybody, the more it's going to come back to haunt you. You won't be punished, but you don't get any benefits of the doubt, et cetera. So to get around this, a lot of teams like to use reversible bumpers. And that's actually not a bad idea. The problem with reversible bumpers is doing it correctly. There's a reversible bumper. What's wrong with that picture? Well, this one isn't as horrible as some I've seen, but is that a blue bumper or a red bumper? Yeah, I can make the argument as blue, but I see a lot of red. You really want to, if you have a reversible bumper, make it clearly blue, clearly red. As I say, this is not a horrible example from the color, but it's not the best example I've seen either. What's really wrong with this picture is that number. That's the other side of that same bumper. What team am I looking at? And what's even worse, what's even worse, you can see on the right-hand side here, or on the left-hand side, there's more to that number. I can't clearly tell what number that is. So not only is the red and blue bothering a little bit, you notice this picture I have up, that's clearly blue. I can see a little red on the right side, but if you make reversible bumpers, there's a number of places that tell you how to do it. I got no problem with it. Just make sure it's distinctly, clearly blue or red. All right, here's another one. Now this is a reversible bumper, but it's a little better because it's clearly a red bumper. But is that Team 30? And notice how the bumpers are mounted. Remember I mentioned bumper zone, and we'll talk about it in a second when we get a little deeper in this presentation. Is that bumper clearly within the bumper zone? And if you look on the far right, the bottom part of that bumper, reversible bumper part, is hanging down. This year, I suspect, same as last year, the bumper zone will extend to the ground, so you're not out of the bumper zone. But some years, the bumper zone is above the ground. And if you protrude down like that, you're outside the bumper zone. A bumper outside the bumper zone is, by definition, an unsafe bumper. Unsafe bumpers do not play our game, and your referees are completely within their authority to declare you dead and disable you. So if you go reversible bumpers, make sure they're under control. Again, same robot we saw a little bit earlier, confused color. Depending on where I'm looking at from, is it red or is it blue? Reversible bumpers, I'm not trying to badmouth them, just do them correctly. All right, one of the major reasons we inspect our machines is safety.
Jeff, can I interject one thing about reversible bumpers? It's also very important to make sure that with your reversible bumpers, the reversing color can't come undone easily during the course of a match. If one of these bumper sides, for example, came loose and folded over to be red, we would probably end up having to disable the robot because it's not clear whether it's a red or blue robot anymore. So be sure that the attachment to keep them one color or the other is very secure.
And I'm pretty sure a little deep in the presentation I mentioned this, but there are teams that will use what we call slipcover bumpers, where each bumper segment literally has a slipcover. They slip over it and tie it off so that it looks red or it's blue. They build a red bumper and put a blue slipcover, a blue bumper and put a red slipcover. Again, a perfectly fine way of doing it, but as Ms. Allison just said, make sure that stays attached. Two things. If it comes loose and falls out of the bumper zone, it's by definition unsafe, she can kill you. But if it falls off the robot, you've now shed parts on the field, and that's not allowed either. So again, reversible bumpers are not bad. I'm not trying to say don't use them. I am trying to say use them correctly. All right. One of the biggest reasons we inspect our robots is safety. And the robot inspector has the last word on this. He is the last line of protection to protect both you, your team, but also the people on the field. You built your robot. You know where the parts are that stick out. You know where the sharp edges are. You know where you might get pinched by something. That field reset person or that referee or anybody who's on the field who has to deal with your robot in a hurry has no clues to what's going on. We build robots with a lot of potentially dangerous things in them. We've got chain drive whirling about. We've got gears running, things that can catch people's clothing, can catch people's fingers, catch people's hair, any of the number of things. Your inspector may ask you to protect something. And essentially, if he's not happy with the safety aspects, excuse me, you can bring it to my attention, but I tend to back my inspectors if it's unsafe. So we're going to be looking for safety issues. All right, one of the big ones, main breaker. Got to have one. And people like to stick it down wherever it's convenient. And there's a good reason for that. It's protected down inside my robot. I can't get it bumped. I can't actually get disabled. And that does happen. People occasionally have their main breaker impacted by a robot, not deliberately, whatnot, but it gets impacted, the breaker opens up, and your robot goes dead. Well, you don't want that to happen. However, let's just think about this for a minute. That robot's on the field, and something goes wrong, and that field person has to go out and disable that robot, either protect the field people or because you've got a real issue with your robot. They got to figure out how to get to it. They've got to get their hands down inside of something they know nothing about, and they've got to get it there quickly. So we're going to talk about where that main breaker goes, and your inspector may ask you to move it. They will not ask you to move it someplace where it will be glaringly out in space and likely to get accidental damage, but they may ask you to move it someplace that it can reasonably be reached. The second big issue is batteries. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but there's a lot of energy in that battery. You can weld with it. You can melt aluminum with it, and you can start fires with it. We're going to be looking to make sure that battery is A, well secured to your robot. The guidance given at first is, imagine I pick this robot up, turn it upside down, and shake it. Will that battery stay in place? We're also going to be looking to see that that battery cannot make contact with metal. If I short that battery, all kinds of exciting things happen. There's a couple batteries that got shorted. And you can see on the left-hand side, it's not horrible. The battery's toast, but it's not horrible. That right-hand side, that battery's gone. It's melted through. It has basically ceased to be a battery. If that happens on the field, more spectacular things are going to happen. So people want to protect them. The one on the left is tie downs, a zip tie for tie down. The official word from FIRST, zip ties are not acceptable for securing substantial items. You can't secure ballast, you can't secure batteries, you can't secure anything that has any substantial mass to it with a zip tie acceptably. Duct tape is no better. In fact, I think I might prefer the zip ties to duct tape, but it's not going to be accepted. I see we got a question about a 3D cover. And
we had a robot accidentally disabled. We wound up 3D printing a cover that covered the main breaker, but it was still in an accessible location.
Not a problem. In fact, that's actually a good solution. As long as that cover can be gotten off easily. It's hinged or it's relatively lightly secured. And again, I think we have it in the presentation a little bit deeper. You have some way to indicate to the field people what it is. They know to look for a main breaker. If it's got a cover on it, they may not recognize that's your main breaker. Put a label on it. The inspection team always has little red arrows that says main breaker. You can point it at your breaker. But protecting your breaker is an excellent idea. It'll be accepted with no questions whatsoever, as long as the field crew knows that's what they're looking at. Okay, wire. Actually, I just realized some of the bumper thing I'm talking about is like bumper printing. But wiring, what difference does it make? You can't read this chart, I know, but it's coming straight out of the robot manual. And essentially, it is defining how big your wires have to be to match loads. The load is determined by the breaker that you install in your PDP. I don't care if you put a 12-volt milliwatt LED on the end of a power lead and you put a 40-amp breaker on it, you're going to run 12-gauge wire. The limit here is determined by both the breaker and the wire size. If I use a 40-amp breaker, I got to have 12-gauge wire. Or bigger, you can use 10-gauge, you can use 6-gauge for all I care. It's just a weight and routing penalty. You can't use smaller. Same thing for a 30-amp, it's got to be 14-gauge, et cetera. You can check the chart. And again, that's non-negotiable. If you have a lot of wire buried, you might want to have a sample just to show an inspector. Sometimes we can't see it well when you got it deep down inside your robot. He may question the size of the wire. Show them a sample. They can tell what gauge it is. It'll be good to go. But pay attention to this chart, because if your wire gauges are not correct, you either rewire your robot or you change your breaker. And your breaker is there to handle the motor that you want to use. You really don't want to downsize your breaker just to make the wiring work out. At least I would think you don't want to. Okay, talk about wiring. And remember we mentioned earlier, both the field crew, referees, judges and such, and inspectors like things made easy on themselves. On the left, that is going to take your inspector a long time to wade through. He's got to verify where those wires go, what they're doing, how big they are they connected to the proper places, do they do the job they're supposed to be, are they the right colors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You just made that inspector not angry, but he's now a little frustrated because he's under time pressure. He's got to get this stuff done. And let's just say, for the sake of discussion, you have a problem with your robot. Something goes wrong. You've got to wade through that wiring mess and figure out which wire goes where. Wire management, get it under control, get it routed, get it labeled, get it identified, and make it look quote unquote pretty. I guarantee you, when an inspector walks up and sees a nicely done wiring system, 65, 70% of the job is done right there. Yes, he's going to check the other things, but if you took the trouble to do that correctly, odds are you're a competent team, you did the rest of it correctly, and he's not going to have to worry about every last nut, bolt, and wire that you got on your robot. So take some time, make it pretty. We don't need to insulate wires. Well, we're carrying a lot of current in some of these wires, 40 amps in places. We put terminals on these things. We have copper wires. If that wire is not properly insulated, and for God knows what reason, something goes across that wire and reaches ground, electricity's pretty lazy. It finds the shortest possible, easiest path it can find, and it heads for there with as fast as it possibly can. It will take with it PDPs, it will take with it robo-rios, it will take with it batteries, it will take with it absolutely positively anything it can find in its path. So one of the things the inspector is going to look for is bare copper. There is no
question.
Yeah.
Lisa says, a suggestion would be to create a wiring diagram in CAD. Gives your CAD team a great project and makes inspectors happy. There are tutorials online.
There are, and one thing that I have done with some of my teams, you take the generic wiring diagram that FRC gives you every year, and you can use that as a starting point and adapt it, because it shows basically the major components. I also had a mentor on one of the teams generate, for lack of better terms, a format that worked in Excel and with Visio. There's a number of ways to do it, but yes, a wiring diagram helps enormously, both in terms of you maintaining your robot, and if an inspector has a question, you whip out a wiring diagram, and he sees it matches your robot. 90% of the problem is taken care of. But insulation, we are going to be looking for bare copper. The two major wires coming at the bottom, power feeds the PDP, anything upstream of that we can see copper on, they're going to ask you to insulate. There is no protection in the system other than the main breaker upstream of the PDP. That main breaker is rated 125 amps. it'll pass 240 amps plus for a number of seconds before it lets go. That's a lot of current just have wandering around your robot. So we're going to be looking real closely at the wires upstream. Downstream, we're going as the Wagos and such. If you've got bare copper showing, he's going to caution you because that's what causes problems like this. And we don't want you to burn up your robot.
Brian also mentions that neat wiring is key for the quality award. Just saying.
Yes, it is. Now, here's the result of a couple of things we just saw. This is a robot in Pacific Northwest, I think 3 years ago, that basically didn't follow all those rules, shorted that battery, and you see it here on fire. Charles happens to have an actual video of this robot going up in flames. So Charles, why don't you throw that video up?
Okay, Allison, pass me the ball, please. Thanks.
You got it, Charles?
Yeah, I'm trying to get it to my screen. That's all.
Okay. It is. There we go.
Oops, wrong one.
All right,
Yeah, I'm trying to get to the right screen.
I was going to go on, but while we were getting sorted out. But again, what we're talking about here, literally, we've only had one that I'm aware of at Peachtree catch fire. It wasn't as dramatic as this one was, but it did go to ground, and it did cause hate and discontent among the troops. Magic smoke got let out, and it was an exciting time for all on the field. It doesn't happen a lot. It's very easy to prevent, so please put some thought and consideration into protecting your robot from this. When you go to mount that battery, you can mount it terminals down towards metal or terminals up towards space. Put the terminals up towards open air. Keep them away from metal. If that robot shifts and that battery shifts and touches metal, you can see what happens.
Seem to be having a problem getting the right window to open. Yes.
There we go.
You see it now?
Well, I see it. It's not playing yet, but I see it.
It's black screen?
Black screen.
Yeah, okay. That's it. Thank you.
There comes the smoke. There comes the FTA trying to find that breaker.
Yeah, so that was the important part right there for them to be able to locate where that thing was.
That's as far as it goes, Charles?
Well, there was more of it. I don't know why it did not show, but they did show the it being extinguished. I don't. Let me replay it again. It's not very long. There we go.
Yeah. Now you've got three people there trying to find a way to turn it off, and one guy just found like douses it. Oh.
And that's it.
Yeah. All right.
Allison, give control back to Jeff, please.
Okay. And you can see it went fire. And okay. Thought we had to pick the FTA there.
Now, just as an additional note on this fire, it also damaged the field.
Yes.
Which is another reason that we do want to avoid fires at all costs.
Not only did it damage the field, but depending upon the fire extinguisher that's brought to bear, if it happens to be a powder extinguisher, it's a mess on the field. More importantly, somebody's robot is now disabled, gone from the event. Nobody got hurt in this case, but you did see the FTA and the crew on the fields trying to find a breaker. It wasn't obvious to them. That's where the question asked about putting a cover on. Excellent question. Great thing to do. Just put a big arrow saying the breaker's over here so people can find it. Okay. You pick into my earlier discussion about basically controlling weight, and you find out that when you get the robot all together, you're underweight. Well, depending on what you're trying to do, being underweight may be good, but a lot of times we're trying to reach high, we're trying to get up on top of things and whatnot, and I want weight to hold my robot down. I want my center of gravity low. So I'm going to add ballast. It's not a problem to add ballast. Make sure it is securely fastened. Zip ties are not acceptable for holding down ballast. You want a minimum of a 1/4 inch hardware, a bolt going through with a washer, something to bolt it down to hold it in place. We will not allow anything that could spill onto the field. Sand, lead shot, BBs, marbles, whatever that sort of stuff happens to be. I had a team a few years ago show up with a cardboard box, untaped, just folded together, full of loose sand that they wanted to put onto the robot. And not only no, but very much so no. I don't have the picture here, but one of my other division inspectors has a picture of a team that was underweight, so they decided to go out to the parking lot and pried up a stop from a parking lot and brought it in, broken about 3/4 of the way down with the rebar in it, and ants still crawling out of it, and tried to put that on their robot. So we're going to have something to say about your ballast, but as long as it's reasonable and secured well, you can have it. You cannot use extra batteries. You cannot put non-functional stims or compressors on there unless they're allowed in the number for that year in the rules. And as I recall, last year was unlimited. It shouldn't be a problem this year. But sometimes we limit how many motors you can have. If you're trying to use it for ballast and you've got 6 drive motors and they allow you 6 motors, you can't use an extra sim for ballast.
Jeff, I do have one more comment. You cannot use any form of lead, not unless the lead is fully encased.
Right.
And have no exposure whatsoever. So old divers, weight belts or weights like that would not be acceptable and would be considered a contaminant to the environment.
Correct. And even more modern weights, they tend to encapsulate in plastic and whatnot. If you have to drill a hole to mount it, you've now violated the containment and you're not going to be allowed. So.
By the way,
right.
Jeff, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. Here's another way to inspector happy. Wait till the absolute last minute. Hey, the practice field's open. We got lots of time, you know. We'll get this done later. Inspector's got a schedule also. You got to get your goofinator working. We aren't done yet. We got to get this robot put together and functional. We'll get the inspection later. And we aren't in the first few mats in the morning. We'll get inspected in the morning. Somehow the software that first generates the matches with knows what robots aren't inspected. If you aren't inspected, I can almost guarantee you'll be in the first, second, or third match. And if we find something wrong in the morning, you haven't got time to fix it. Still working on your software. Robot isn't ready yet. We don't inspect software. Nothing beyond just does the power to have the right operating system. Get the robot inspected. An inspected robot can sit on the field. An uninspected robot can't. Size and weight, they stop you from playing. Both are hard to do quickly. Get in early, get those done. Got time to respond. You don't have to be complete. We can inspect anything that you can reasonably define as a robot and give you, for lack of better terms, a partial inspection. All you got to bring is the parts that are missing, and we'll complete the inspection, and you're good to go. You can also bring in a robot that's not yet fully functional and get it inspected. It can go to a match, and then we can add the parts you're still working on. Not a problem. Inspectors are busy. They have a lot to do, and particularly that first morning, you can't count on them dropping what they're doing and running over to get your inspection done so that you can make your match. We'll try, but I can't guarantee it. If you are going to make changes, and we all know we're going to, things just don't work the way we wanted to, no problem. We thought about it before. We can change our widget to a gadget, and it'll be just great. Well, you got a problem here. If you change your robot and an inspector hasn't seen it, it is not an inspected robot. But we got a match coming up. We got to get this done. Great, do it. But get an inspector to look at it. Even if he does nothing more than come over and casually look at it and say, yes, I see no problem. We'll do the paperwork later. Get it done. If you chase it back far enough, there's about 15, 18 pages on Chief Delphi where a robot that I inspected and allowed to play, the losing team wanted to whine because it wasn't legal. It was, but we're not playing that game anymore. It's to protect you. You've got a legal robot. You can't be disqualified. It's to protect the inspection team. We made it a legal robot. You almost have to make those changes, but then you get inspected. Uninspected robots illegal, and in the current rules, if an illegal robot plays, the entire alliance that plays with it is subject to disqualification. Inspectors are going to be watching for those kind of things. If we happen to see one, they're going to flag it and let you know. And I would much rather see minor changes that really I didn't need to see than miss something that you really did need to see. Sometimes, particularly as we get into the more competition, more aggressive competitions, there are teams out there watching. That wasn't the same as last time. It's been changed. They'll file a protest, and if I've got the paperwork to protect you, it doesn't go anywhere. We'd rather see, I've had teams bring me, they changed a zip tie. I don't need to see that, but I'd rather see it than not see something I need to see. Finally, the inspectors really are your friend. Too many people view us as, for lack of better terms, the enemy. We are there trying to help you get on the field in the best possible shape as soon as we possibly can. They are encouraged to be and think of themselves, and we want you to think of us as part of your team. We will do everything within our power to help you resolve a problem. If we see something that's wrong, we can make suggestions as to how you might possibly fix it. We cannot tell you what to do, but you can ask and say, hey, if we change X to Y, would that be okay? And the inspector can tell you, sure, that would be perfectly fine. If you start down that road and you find you're doing a lot of work, if it's taking a long time, unless we all agree it's a major change, get that inspector again. Somebody didn't communicate. We are not expecting you to rebuild a robot unless it's a real major problem. Usually something minor. I've talked to teams when it's a project, when I see it's 15, 20, maybe half an hour to fix, come back in half an hour and they got the robot disassembled because they misunderstood. If you see it being a big project, ask. Don't go off and do something that's going to cause you a problem. Finally, if you haven't asked a question and you have one now, I'm all for it. Anybody got anything? No questions. Everybody's going to pass inspection first try in the first hour, right?
It might take them a minute or two to type it up, Jeff.
I understand. Well, I guess I can't in this point. When I was in your role, I could see that people were typing. That's all. What do we got? I got almost 10 minutes. Questions about anything. Doesn't have to be robot inspection related. As I say, I know nothing more about this year's game than you do. I've heard a couple of rumors, as we all have, but nothing is official yet. I know FRC is working very, very hard to go through our inspected.
Tessa has asked, what was the coolest robot you've ever inspected?
How many of you people here remember Overdrive?
Yes.
I had a team come to the championship with an autonomous motorcycle. It had little training wheels on it just to get it rolling. But once they powered that guy up, and you got points for lapping this course. Once they got powered up, it just went around and around the course as fast as it possibly could. And it would do almost a lap and a half in autonomous mode. It was cool. The other one I liked a lot, Aim High. Mo 365 built essentially an M1 Abrams tank system. The robot would scoop balls off the floor, just as long as it was driving and scooping up balls. It had a hopper. You could carry as many balls as you could possibly get a hold of. But it had a tracking system. We had a lit target. And that tracking system locked onto that target, and that robot would put balls in the target no matter what happened to it. There was a ramp up to a platform for the final game. I watched that robot get pushed up that ramp, almost turned over, and while it's sitting there at about a 40-degree angle, that target mechanism had tracked the target, and it put every ball it had in its hopper into that target before it came back off the ramp and picked up some more. Again, somebody did a great job of programming to maintain that degree of accuracy and that degree of reliability. I was impressed. One
thing I'd like to mention real quick is we are a district state, and so just because your robot passes at one district does not mean that it will definitely pass at the next one. People make mistakes sometimes. I mean, I inspected at Dalton once and found a robot that had its entire intake system outside the frame perimeter, and they told me, how could that possibly be? We passed inspection last week at Gainesville.
I inspected a robot at Championship one year that I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was illegal. And I was asking because basically an inspector made a mistake. I'll find the inspector and try to prevent it from happening again. Asked him, who was the last person who inspected you? And the adult looked at it, you. You know, I'd missed something. It happens.
Yeah, they told me George inspected them.
I'm sorry?
From Dalton, they said George.
Yes.
Took me a minute before I remembered.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, I go by George P. Burdell at these events. I'm the crazy guy in this silly pink hat. But yeah, I get that a lot. But you'll also find, I went to 2 years ago, division lead, and essentially I had a robot that had 4 banners on the wall from that year. They'd been to 4 separate regional events and done quite well at all of them. That was illegal. Stuff happens. People miss things.
Lisa says the scales between districts and even worlds can vary with calibration.
Yes, they can. The scales are calibrated against a known set of weights, but if you're building, this is back to that 125 pounds, if you're building right to 125 pounds, A, the weights can be a little bit off, B, the scales are a little bit off, any of a number of things can happen. You know, I tell my team to build to 122, maybe 123, I'd rather be a little under. I want to be a little under the size. I don't want to be 144 inches. I want to be 142 and a half. You know, it just depends.
And like Jeff said, we take pride in actually making sure that our measurements on as far as the weight of the robot is highly accurate, because we do have a set of weights that we get calibrated every year. We just don't assume in every event the scale is recalibrated. So it's not like, at the first of the year we have it calibrated. No, we recheck it every year.
Correct, and our weights are calibrated to the 100th of a pound. The weights that first gets are calibrated to plus or minus, not only a pound, but a little better than that, but they're not as accurate as our weights are. So, but yes, they do vary sometimes. Unfortunately, we have to go by the weight that the scale shows us. Now, if you are right on the money and you think that you're not being weighed correctly, we will throw the calibration weights out and we will show you what it reads. And I will admit that the head unit will occasionally drift a little bit one way or the other. It's one of the reasons we try to get you guys to be careful around their scales, because you kick it and slide it around, it does mess up our calibration. But if it does come off, we'll reweigh you. We're trying very, very hard to put you on the field. If robots don't go to the field, I have to answer to first. So it's to my benefit to get you on the field if I possibly can.
Now, just 2 years ago, I think it was, or maybe it was 3, and it was Stronghold 17. I had a robot, I'm trying to remember the name of that high school we went to up there in Alpharetta. I'll think of it in a minute. Anyhow, was one of the primary inspectors up there, and we had one robot that came in so badly overweight, they spent the entire time trying to reduce weight. They had to take their main mechanism off, and they were constantly drilling holes, and they'd come back, they'd only maybe get a half pound. And I mean, when I said they were overweight by, I think, 12 or 14 pounds. And it took them, they never did compete with their mechanism. They ended up having to compete as basically a pizza box.
I had a robot come, they're still regionals, coming from out of state. And it's the only time I ever saw them. But they had a welded robot to the previous year's size dimensions before we went to the frame perimeter. And they were a good 4 or 5 inches out of frame perimeter. And the mentor just went ballistic. When did that rule get changed? And I had to point out that it was changed at kickoff. And he was not a happy camper. They spent their entire session cutting the robot apart, resizing it, rebuilding it, and trying to get it legal. Stuff does happen, but anybody else got a question? as
We've
I
got time
say,
for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. We got about 2 minutes.
right. I do not know how this season's going to work out. Like I said, I've heard some rumors, but I look forward to seeing you guys, hopefully, at least in some fashion of person or virtual. It's more fun than I should be allowed to have to play with you guys. So I look forward a lot. Look forward to it a lot. I hope to see you again.
Georgia inspectors do a great job working with teams. Their determination to work with teams and get them on the field is impressive. I've seen them help with programming, building bumpers, making suggestions, etc. Many thanks to Jeff, Charles, and team.
Well, thank you, but Ms. Hatch, your kids help us with bumpers enormously. All right, no other questions? I appreciate you guys joining me. I hope you learned something. And again, if you have questions during the season, get in touch with me. Short of Q&As and team updates, I can give you a definitive answer. Ms. Allison, I think we're done.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Y'all have a good one.